He closed the door and stood in front of her. "I've loved you for 6 years. I won't let you go tonight." "Hi, my very beautiful and loyal family. How are you all? Before we begin, I want to share something from my heart. First, please accept my sincere apology. Yesterday's story wasn't good, and I truly regret that. I know you love heartwarming and passionate stories, but I made a mistake by adding some science fiction scenes. I saw many comments against it, and I understand. I love your criticism because it helps me grow, but please don't insult me. You know I was resting due to heart issues, yet I came back only for you. I can't read like before, but I'm trying my best for my family. I missed you more than you can imagine, and the pain of being away from you was unbearable. You are my strength, my reason to keep going. Criticize me, because I am nothing without you, but please don't insult me or my family. Today, I will not ask you for likes or comments. If you feel my work deserves it, then you will do it from your heart. If I don't, then I will accept it with love. A prayer for heart. Patience. Heavenly Father, I come before you today, lifting up all those who are struggling with heart issues. Lord, place your healing hands upon them and restore their strength, ease their pain, calm their worries, and fill their hearts with peace. Give them the courage to face each day, the patience to endure their struggles, and the faith to trust in your divine plan. Bless the doctors, nurses, and caregivers who are working tirelessly to help them heal. May they find comfort in your presence and hope in your love. Lord, I ask for healing not just for myself, but for anyone in my beautiful family who is suffering. Let them feel your grace, your mercy, and your unending love. In your holy name, I pray. Amen. Now let's begin the story. Rain poured from the heavens as if the clouds had split open, drenching everything beneath them. Don Bradman cursed his luck, having left his umbrella in the car that was now in the shop. He ducked under the striped awning of a small storefront, shaking water from his dark hair. The scent hit him first, warm cinnamon, vanilla, and fresh bread. Through the glass, he spotted a cozy bakery, its golden light spilling onto the wet sidewalk like an invitation. With nowhere else to go and his clothes already soaked, Don pushed open the door. A small bell announced his arrival, but no one appeared. At the counter, the bakery was empty of customers, not surprising given the downpour outside. Don stood dripping on the welcome mat, not wanting to ruin the polished wooden floors. "I'll be right with you," called a melodious voice from the back. Don's eyes wandered the charming space. Vintage cake stands displayed golden pastries, handwritten signs described daily specials, and black and white photographs of what must be family members adorned. The walls. It felt immediately like a place with history, with heart. "Sorry to keep you waiting. This dough waits for no one." Don turned toward the voice and felt the world shift beneath his feet. She stood behind the counter, wiping flour-covered hands on a red apron tied around a narrow waist. Her rich brown skin glowed in the bakery's warm lighting, and her dark eyes sparkled with warmth. She wore her hair in dozens of tiny braids pulled back from her face, revealing high cheekbones and full lips that curved into a welcoming smile. "You're soaked through!" she exclaimed, grabbing a clean towel from beneath the counter and coming around to hand it to him. "Nasty weather out there. Here, dry off a bit." Don took the towel, acutely aware of her floral scent, mingling with the bakery smells as she stepped closer. "Thank you," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. "I got caught without an umbrella." "The rain always catches someone unprepared," she replied with a gentle laugh. She extended her hand. "I'm Charisse Smith. This is my place." "Don Bradman," he replied, taking her hand. Her skin was warm, soft, except for the slight calluses that spoke of her craft. Something electric passed between them in that brief touch, making Don hold on a moment longer than necessary. "Well, Don Bradman," Charisse said, seemingly unaffected by what had just coursed through his entire being. "Let me get you something warm to drink while you dry off." She returned to her place behind the counter, filling a mug with steaming coffee. "Cream or sugar?" "Black is fine," Don answered, watching her movements with fascination. She moved with the grace of a dancer, every gesture efficient yet somehow lyrical. "I haven't seen you around before," Charisse remarked, sliding the mug across the counter. "Just passing through." Don shook his head, taking the warm cup gratefully. "I moved here last month. I'm an architect with Pearson and Associates downtown." "An architect?" Her eyebrows rose with interest. "Building skyscrapers and shopping malls?" Don smiled, surprising himself. He rarely smiled around strangers. "Nothing. So grand. I design homes mostly, places for real people to live real lives." "I like that," Charisse said, leaning against the counter. "Too many people forget houses need to be homes first." As Don sipped his coffee, rich and perfectly brewed, his eyes continued to study her. There was something magnetic about Charisse, something that made it impossible to look away. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows, but he barely noticed. "What brings you to our little town?" Charisse asked. "We're hardly an architectural hotspot." "Family, in a way," Don replied. "My grandmother lived here. When she passed last year, I inherited her house. It's taken this long to wrap things up in Chicago and make the move." "I'm sorry about your grandmother," Charisse said, genuine sympathy in her voice. "Thank you. She lived a good life, right until the end." Don paused. "This bakery reminds me of her, actually. She made the best apple pie I've ever tasted." Charisse's face lit up. "That's the highest compliment you could give. This place was my grandmother's too. I took over 5 years ago when her arthritis got too bad for baking." Another customer entered, bringing a gust of wind and rain. Charisse moved to help them, giving Don a moment to observe her unnoticed. The way she greeted the elderly man by name, asking about his wife's health. The genuine way she listened to his answer. The extra cookie she slipped into his bag for Dorothy. Don's fingers itched for his sketchbook. There was something in the curve of Charisse's neck, the way light caught her profile, that begged to be captured. As an architect, Don had learned to draw, but rarely did he feel compelled to sketch people rather than buildings. When the customer left, Charisse returned to Don. "More coffee?" "Please," he said, though his cup was still half full. Any excuse to extend this moment. As she refilled his mug, Don noticed a series of small burns on her forearms, badges of her profession. Her hands, though beautiful, showed the effects of her work. Strong, capable, with short nails, practical for baking. "What's your specialty?" Don asked. "Pies," Charisse answered without hesitation. "Particularly apple, like your grandmother's, though I doubt mine measure up to your memories." "I'd like to be the judge of that sometime," Don said, surprising himself with his boldness. Charisse laughed, the sound washing over him like warm honey. "Fair enough. We're closed Mondays, but I'm baking a fresh batch Tuesday morning." The invitation hung in the air between them, casual yet somehow weighted with possibility. Don knew with sudden clarity that he would return on Tuesday, and probably every day after that, his schedule allowed. As the rain slowed to a gentle patter, Don reluctantly placed his empty mug on the counter. "I should let you get back to your dough. It's probably overproofed by now," Charisse said with a good-natured shrug. "But that's the joy of baking. Even mistakes can turn into something wonderful if you know how to work with them." Don paid for his coffee, despite Charisse's insistence it was on the house for a rain-soaked first-time customer. As he turned to leave, he paused. "Your grandmother, does she still get to taste your baking?" Charisse's smile turned bittersweet. "She passed last year, just a few months after I won the county fair with her apple pie recipe." "I'm sorry," Don said, recognizing the fresh grief in her eyes. "It seems we have more in common than I thought." "Perhaps we do, Don Bradman," Charisse replied softly. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, though water still dripped from awnings and gutters. Don walked away from Cherise's bakery, feeling strangely lighter than when he had entered, despite the weight of his damp clothes. Later that evening, in the quiet of his grandmother's house, his house now, Don found himself at his drafting table. But instead of working on the Robinson family home plans due next week, he was sketching the curve of a woman's cheek, the shape of eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. He didn't stop until he had filled 3 pages with Charis Smith's features, trying to capture the light that seemed to radiate from within her. None of the sketches satisfied him. They were mere shadows of her vibrance. But still he drew, driven by an impulse he didn't fully understand. Don Bradman, who had designed dozens of homes for others, who had built his career on understanding how spaces made people feel, had never expected to be ambushed by his own feelings in a small bakery on a rainy afternoon. He knew, with the certainty that came from years of trusting his instincts about spaces and structures, that he would return to Cherise's bakery, not just for Tuesday's apple pie, but to see if the connection he'd felt had been real or merely a product of the rain, coffee, and unexpected kindness. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that this day marked the beginning of a devotion that would remain unspoken for years to come. That the beautiful baker, with the warm eyes and skilled hands, would unwittingly capture his heart in a way no woman ever had before. As Don finally set down his pencil and prepared for bed, the rain returned, tapping gently against his windows, like a reminder of the moment his life had imperceptibly but irrevocably changed. Chapter 2. Hidden Glances. 3 weeks had passed since Don first stepped into Cherise's bakery, and he had returned nearly every day since. He claimed a small table in the corner where the morning light was perfect for sketching. He ordered coffee and whatever Charis recommended that day, then opened his sketchbook, ostensibly working on building designs. But between drafting roof lines and window placements, Don's pencil inevitably strayed to the woman behind the counter, the way she tossed her head back when she laughed, how she bit her lower lip in concentration while decorating intricate cookies, the graceful dance of her hands kneading dough. His sketchbook filled with her, sometimes just her eyes, sometimes her profile, sometimes her whole figure, caught in a moment of unguarded joy. Don was careful to never let her see these drawings. He kept a separate section of his book for buildings, which he would casually show her when she inquired about his work. "You make that old Ferguson place look like it belongs in a magazine," Charis commented one morning, glancing at his renovation design for a local historic home. "The Fergusons have been trying to sell that place for years." Don shrugged, fighting the urge to flip the page where he'd captured her hands cupping a steaming mug. "It has good bones, just needs someone to see its potential." "Like you?" Charis said, her dark eyes meeting his with a warmth that made his chest tighten. "I just see what's already there," Don replied softly. Charis smiled. "That's a rare gift, Don Bradman." She moved away to help another customer, unaware that Don's gaze followed her, drinking in the curve of her neck, the sway of her hips beneath her yellow dress. He added these details to his mental catalogue, to be drawn later in the privacy of his home, where he could take his time perfecting the arch of her eyebrow or the dimple that appeared in her left cheek when she smiled widely. Don knew his behavior, bordered on obsession, but he couldn't help himself. Something about Charis Smith had captured him completely. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was undeniably gorgeous, but her spirit. The way she remembered every customer's name and their usual order, how she slipped extra treats into children's bags when harried parents weren't looking, the gentleness with which she guided her teenage assistant through complicated recipes. He learned through careful observation and casual conversation that Charis had moved back to town 5 years ago when her grandmother's health declined. that she'd given up a promising career as a pastry chef in New York to take over the family bakery, that she lived in the apartment above the shop, alone except for a cat named Biscuit. Don wanted to tell her how extraordinary that sacrifice was, how much he admired her devotion to family. But whenever they spoke, he kept the conversation light, afraid that revealing too much of his admiration would expose the depth of his feelings, because surely a woman like Charisse, vibrant, kind, beautiful Charisse, couldn't possibly be interested in him. Don was quiet, serious, more comfortable with pencils and drafting paper than people. At 32, his dating history was brief and unremarkable. And though he was successful in his field, he lacked the flashy confidence he imagined would appeal to a woman who lit up every room she entered. So he maintained his careful distance, treasuring their casual friendship, storing away each smile, each conversation, to sustain him through long evenings alone with his sketchbook, until the day the storm came. It began as a spring shower, strengthening throughout the day until the skies opened in a torrential downpour, reminiscent of the day they'd met. Don had stayed late at the bakery, losing track of time as he finalized designs for a client's dream house. "Don, you'd better head home," Charisse said, concern in her voice. As she glanced out the window, the creek's already over its banks at Maple Street. Don looked up, startled by the ferocity of the storm. "What about you?" "I live upstairs," she reminded him, turning the bakery sign to closed. "I'll be fine." Don gathered his materials, reluctantly, preparing to leave when a crack of thunder shook the building. Both looked out the window to see water rushing down the street, already ankle-deep and rising fast. "That's not normal," Charisse whispered, her usual composure slipping. Don moved to her side, following her gaze to where water now lapped at the bakery's front step. "The storm drains must be backed up," panic flashed across Charisse's face. "The basement storage, all Grandma's recipes." Before Don could respond, Charisse was moving, unlocking a door behind the counter and disappearing down a narrow staircase. Don followed without hesitation. The basement was already taking on water, seeping through the old foundation. Charisse rushed to a set of shelves where boxes and bins were stacked. "Help me move these upstairs," she pleaded, already lifting a heavy container. "Please, Don, these recipes are irreplaceable." They worked together in urgent silence, carrying boxes up the narrow stairs. Old recipe books, handwritten cards yellowed with age, photographs, ledgers, the history of generations preserved in these fragile paper treasures. As Don carried the last box to safety, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into near darkness. The only illumination came from the emergency exit sign's dim glow. "The basement will flood completely," Charisse said, her voice tight with fear. "The equipment, the supplies, we need sandbags," Don said decisively. "Do you have any empty flour sacks?" An hour later, they had created a makeshift barrier using sacks filled with rice and sugar, positioned to direct water away from the building's foundation. They worked by flashlight, soaked to the skin despite staying inside, water already inches deep around their ankles. "This is the worst storm I've seen since moving back," Charisse said, pushing wet braids from her face. Don nodded, carefully placing another weighted sack. "Your grandmother's recipes, why were they in the basement?" "I've been meaning to move them," Charisse admitted. "After she died, I just couldn't bring myself to go through everything, so I packed it all away." In that moment, lit by the dim flashlight beam, Charisse looked vulnerable in a way Don had never seen before. Her usual confident demeanor had given way to something softer, more fragile. Don fought the urge to pull her into his arms. Instead, he said, "Tell me about her, your grandmother." As they continued working to protect the bakery, Charisse shared stories of the woman who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8. How her grandmother had taught her to bake, not with precise measurements, but by feel and instinct. how they dance around the kitchen to old jazz records while waiting for bread to rise. "She sounds remarkable," Don said, meaning it. "Like you." Charisse's eyes met his in the dim light, something unreadable in their depths. "Thank you for being here, Don. I don't know what I would have done alone." The intimacy of the moment, their shared effort against the elements, broke something open in Don. With water rising around them and rain pounding against the building, he found courage he didn't know he possessed. "Charisse, The front door burst open, letting in a gust of wind and rain, along with a tall man in a dripping raincoat. "Charisse, are you okay?" "I came as soon as I heard the creek was flooding." Charisse turned, her expression shifting instantly. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" Don stepped back, the moment shattered, as the newcomer strode toward Charisse with familiar confidence. "I was worried about you," Marcus said, embracing her without hesitation. "The whole downtown is underwater." Don watched as Charisse stiffened slightly in the man's arms before pulling away. "I'm fine. Don and I have been working to keep the water out." Marcus turned, noticing Don for the first time. His eyes narrowed slightly. "And you are?" "Don Bradman," he answered, extending a hand that Marcus shook with perhaps more force than necessary. "A friend of Charisse's." "Marcus Taylor," the man replied. "Charisse's ex." The possessive way he said it, the intimate familiarity with which he stood beside her, told Don everything he needed to know. This was a man who had shared Charisse's life, her bed, her heart. A man who clearly still thought he had some claim. "On her, I should check the back door," Don said quietly, needing an escape from the sudden tension. "Make sure our barricade is holding." As he moved away, he heard Marcus's low voice. "I've been thinking about us, Char. About what went wrong." Don didn't wait to hear Charisse's response. His courage had evaporated, replaced by a cold certainty that he had been foolish to imagine himself worthy of her attention. Marcus was handsome, confident, clearly successful, judging by his expensive watch and shoes. Next to him, Don felt invisible. He spent the next hour reinforcing their defenses against the flood, working methodically to channel his emotions into physical labor. When he finally returned to the main room, Marcus was gone. Charisse stood alone at the window, watching the rain. In the dim emergency lighting, her profile was etched against the darkness outside, beautiful enough to break Don's heart all over. "Again, he left," she said without turning. "He always does when things get difficult." Don moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. The rain slowing. "I think the worst has passed." Charisse turned to him, a smile touching her lips despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. "Thank you, Don. You saved my grandmother's recipes. You saved the bakery." "We saved it together," Don corrected gently. Something in Charisse's expression softened as she looked at him, really looked at him in a way that made his pulse quicken. For a brief, wild moment, Don thought she might step closer, might close the careful distance he always maintained between them. Instead, she said, "You're soaked through. Let me find you something dry to wear before you head home." And just like that, the moment passed, if it had ever truly existed outside Don's wishful imagination. He followed her upstairs to her apartment, accepting the oversized sweatshirt she offered, likely Marcus's, he thought, with an irrational stab of jealousy. As Don finally drove home in the early hours of the morning, the storm having subsided to a gentle rain, he thought of how Charisse had looked in those unguarded moments of vulnerability, how right it had felt to work beside her, to protect something precious to her. And he knew with a certainty that both elated and terrified him that he was falling deeply, irrevocably in love with Charisse Smith. A love he would likely never express aloud, for fear of shattering the friendship that had become the brightest part of his carefully ordered life. In his sketchbook that night, Don drew Charisse as he had seen her in the dim emergency lighting. Strong, despite her fear. Beautiful, despite the chaos around her. And for the first time, he signed the drawing. A silent acknowledgement of feelings he could no longer deny, even to himself. Chapter 3. Her Broken Heart. The bell above the door rang as Don entered the bakery on a bright Tuesday morning. 3 days had passed since the flood, and already Charisse had the place spotless again, with only slight water damage visible along the baseboards. "Good morning, miracle worker," Don said, genuine admiration in his voice. Charisse looked up from the display case she was arranging, her smile warming him like sunrise. "Don, I was hoping you'd come in today." Her enthusiasm caught him off guard, breaking through the careful restraint he'd imposed on himself since seeing Marcus. "The place looks amazing." "Thanks to you," she replied, coming around the counter. "I realized I never properly thanked you, so..." She gestured to his usual table, where a steaming mug of coffee and a plate with a generous slice of apple pie waited. "Your breakfast is on the house, for the foreseeable future." Don's protest died on his lips when Charisse touched his arm, steering him toward the table. The simple contact through his shirt sleeve sent electricity through him. "Sit, eat. I've been experimenting with Grandma's apple pie recipe, and I need your expert opinion." Don obeyed, watching as she returned to the counter. She wore a simple blue dress today, her braids pulled into a loose bun that revealed the elegant line of her neck. He longed to sketch her just like this, bathed in morning light, her movements graceful as she served the first customers of the day. The pie was perfect. Tart apples, flaky crust, a hint of something unexpected that made the flavors sing. Don savored each bite, making notes in his head about the subtle genius of the spices, the ideal balance of sweetness. The morning crowd thinned around 10, and Charisse surprised him by bringing her own coffee to his table and sitting down. Her presence across from him felt simultaneously like a gift and a test of his composure. "So," she asked, gesturing to his empty plate, "Grandmother Smith's legacy, have I done it justice?" "Beyond justice," Don replied honestly. "It's the best apple pie I've ever tasted." Her smile was radiant. Coming from a man who cherishes pie memories, that's high praise indeed. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Charisse clearly working up to something, Don content to simply be in her presence. "Marcus came back last night," she finally said, eyes dropping to her coffee. Don's chest tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "After the flood?" Charisse nodded. "He wants to try again, says he's changed, that he now understands what he threw away." Don waited, sensing there was more. When Charisse looked up, her eyes held a shadow of old pain. "You know, what he said when we broke up last year? That he wasn't ready to commit to a life with a black woman." She laughed, the sound bitter and unlike her usual warmth. "As if loving me required some special kind of courage or sacrifice." White-hot anger flashed through Don, surprising in its intensity. "He actually said that? To your face?" "Oh, he tried to soften it, said it was about cultural differences, how his family might not understand. But we both knew what he meant." Charisse shrugged, but Don could see the hurt beneath her casual gesture. "After 2 years together, that's what it came down to. The color of my skin was too complicated for him." Don fought to control his voice. "He didn't deserve you, not for a single moment." Something in his tone made Charisse look at him more closely. "You really mean that, don't you?" "Any man would be lucky to love you, Charisse," Don said, the words escaping before he could censor them. "Your skin isn't an obstacle to overcome. It's part of your beauty. Anyone who can't see that is blind to everything wonderful about you." Charisse's eyes widened slightly, and Don feared he'd said too much. But then she reached across the table and squeezed his hand, her touch sending sparks through his entire body. "Thank you, Don," she said softly. "You always know exactly what to say." What did you tell him? Don asked, desperate to know yet afraid of the answer. About trying again? Charisse withdrew her hand, leaving his feeling cold. I told him no. Some betrayals can't be undone. She glanced at the clock. I should get back to work. The lunch crowd will be here soon. As she stood, Don found himself asking, Are you okay? Charisse paused, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. I will be. It just brings back all the doubts, you know. Makes me wonder if there's something wrong with me, that he couldn't love all of me. There's nothing wrong with you, Don said firmly. Nothing at all. She gave him a small smile before returning to her work, leaving Don with a fierce protectiveness burning in his chest. If he could, he would shield her from every doubt, every hurt, every moment of questioning her own worth. Over the next few weeks, Don noticed a change in the town's attitude toward Charisse. Whispers followed her at the farmer's market. Regular customers suddenly found reasons to shop elsewhere. The bakery, usually bustling, grew quieter. What's happening? Don finally asked one morning when Charisse looked particularly tired, the strain showing in the tight set of her shoulders. She sighed, leaning against the counter. Marcus has been spreading stories since I turned him down, saying I led him on, that I'm difficult. Small towns love gossip, especially when it confirms their pre-existing biases about a single black woman with her own business. That's despicable, Don said, anger rising again. He can't just lie about you. Oh, he's careful. Nothing outright false, just implications, enough to make people uncomfortable. Charisse's smile was forced. It'll blow over. It always does. But it didn't blow over. The whispers continued, customers dwindled, and Don watched helplessly as Charisse's bright spirit dimmed under the weight of undeserved judgment. Until the day he overheard Marcus himself at the hardware store, surrounded by a group of men, his voice carrying clearly across the aisle, just saying she's got a temper on her. You know how they can be, all sweet on the surface, but underneath. Marcus let the implication hang, earning knowing chuckles from his audience. Something in Don snapped. He rounded the corner, facing the group directly. Interesting perspective, Marcus. Especially since everyone knows you broke up with Charisse because you lacked the backbone to stand by a woman too good for you. Marcus's head whipped around, eyes narrowing. Excuse me? You heard me. Don stepped closer, his quiet voice carrying more impact than a shout. Charisse Smith is the most generous, hard-working person in this town. She stayed to care for her grandmother while you were off finding yourself. She builds this community up every day while you tear it down with petty gossip. The other men shifted uncomfortably as Don continued. Anyone lucky enough to be loved by Charisse would be a fool to throw it away. But then, you've always been a fool, haven't you, Marcus? Marcus's face flushed with anger. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know her like I do. I know she deserves better than lies from a man too insecure to appreciate her. Don turned to the uncomfortable bystanders. And I know this town is better than this. Better than judging one of its finest citizens based on bitter falsehoods. Without waiting for a response, Don paid for his materials and left, heart pounding with adrenaline. He'd never confronted anyone like that before, had always avoided conflict. But the thought of Charisse suffering for Marcus's wounded pride was unbearable. Don didn't tell Charisse about the confrontation, but within days, the whispers ceased. Customers returned to the bakery. Several people made a point of telling Charisse how much they appreciated her contribution to the community. I don't know what changed, Charisse told Don, genuine puzzlement in her voice as she surveyed her once again busy bakery. But I'm grateful. Don simply shrugged, hiding behind his coffee cup. People remember what's true eventually. That night, Don did something he'd never done before. He wrapped one of his sketches of Charisse, her laughing while dusting flour from her cheek, and left it in a small package on the bakery's doorstep with a note containing a single line, "See yourself as others see you." He didn't sign it, didn't want recognition. He only wanted to give Charisse back some of the light the town's cruelty had dimmed in her eyes. The next morning, Don watched from across the street as Charisse discovered the package, watched her unwrap it, stare at the drawing, read the note, watched her eyes fill with tears as she traced the lines of her own joyful face, captured with such evident adoration. It was the first of many anonymous gifts. A rare vanilla bean from Madagascar, left with a note about the sweetness she brought to ordinary days. An antique rolling pin, accompanied by words about how she shaped the community with her hands and heart. An old jazz record like the ones she'd danced to with her grandmother, with a message about keeping beloved traditions alive. Don never signed these offerings, never hinted at their source. But he treasured the way Charisse's eyes would light up when she discovered each one, how she would hold them reverently, as if they were precious beyond measure. And perhaps most precious of all was the gradual return of her confidence, her joy, her radiant spirit that had first captured Don's heart. If his anonymous gestures played even a small role in that restoration, it was worth every moment of silent longing, because to love Charisse Smith from afar, Don was discovering, was better than not loving her at all. Even if she never knew, even if she never felt the same, bearing witness to her joy was its own kind of blessing. Chapter 4. The journal summer arrived with a gentleness that belied the spring's temperamental storms. Don's visits to the bakery had become such a fixture of his days that the staff greeted him by name, his coffee ready before he even reached the counter. What began as an obsession had deepened into something more profound. Don no longer simply noticed Charisse's beauty, though he still sketched her regularly, but had come to appreciate the depth of her character, her unwavering kindness to difficult customers, her patience with Tessa, the troubled teenager she'd hired despite the girl's reputation for unreliability, the quiet generosity that had her delivering day-old bread to the senior center every evening. Don's sketchbook had evolved too. Beyond drawings of Charisse, he'd begun adding poetry in the margins. Nothing grand or polished, just honest expressions of what he felt watching her move through her days with such grace. Words he would never speak aloud but needed to release. Somehow, your hands create more than pastry. They shape moments of joy, small mercies of sugar and flour that remind us sweetness exists. It was dangerous, this documentation of his feelings. Don knew that, but the sketchbook was his alone, a private space to examine emotions too overwhelming to contain yet too frightening to express. As long as he kept the book close, his secret remained safe. Until the Tuesday, Tessa knocked over his coffee. "I'm so sorry," the girl cried, frantically mopping at the spill spreading across Don's table, soaking his rolled-up blueprints for the new Thompson house. "It's fine," Don assured her, quickly gathering the blueprints. In his haste to salvage his work, he left without realizing he'd forgotten something far more precious than architectural drawings. His sketchbook remained on the chair, partially hidden by his jacket. Don didn't notice its absence until that evening, when he reached for it out of habit. Panic seized him as he searched his home, retracing his day, before the terrible truth emerged. He'd left it at the bakery. Sleep evaded him that night. Don's mind raced with horrifying possibilities. What if Charisse found it? What if she saw the drawings, read the poetry? Years of silent devotion exposed in those pages, revealing feelings she had never invited, might never welcome. He arrived at the bakery the next morning before it opened, heart pounding as he knocked on the glass door. Charisse appeared from the back, flour already dusting her forearms. Her expression when she saw him was unreadable. She unlocked the door, but didn't immediately open it. "We need to talk," she said through the glass. Don's stomach dropped. She had found it. He nodded, resigned to whatever came next. Inside, the bakery smelled of fresh bread and cinnamon, the familiar comfort at odds with Don's churning anxiety. Charisse gestured to his usual table where, to his horror, his sketchbook lay open. "Sit," she said quietly. Don obeyed, unable to look at the book or at her. "Charisse, I can explain—" "Can you?" Her voice was soft, not accusatory as he'd feared, but thoughtful. "Because I've been trying to understand all night." Forcing himself to meet her gaze, Don found not anger, but honest confusion in her dark eyes. "How long?" she asked simply. Don swallowed hard. "Since the first day, the rain." Charisse nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion. 8 months. "I never meant for you to see these," Don said, finally glancing down at the open page. A sketch of Charisse laughing, head thrown back, alongside a poem about how her joy illuminated the darkest corners of his world. "I never meant to make you uncomfortable. Is that what you think I am?" "Uncomfortable?" Don looked up, surprised by her tone. "Aren't you? Finding out someone's been watching you, drawing you, writing about you without your knowledge." Charisse sat across from him, her fingers brushing the edge of the sketchbook. "When Tessa found this last night, she was going to throw it in the lost and found box, but it fell open, and she saw my face looking back at her." A small smile touched her lips. "She brought it to me, thinking I should know I had a creepy stalker." Don winced at the term. "That's what I expected to find when I opened it," Charisse continued. "Something unsettling, invasive. Instead," she turned the pages slowly, each one revealing another aspect of Don's silent adoration. "Instead, I found the most beautiful thing anyone has ever created for me." Hope fluttered in Don's chest, quickly tamped down by caution. "You're not upset? I stayed up all night looking at these, reading your words." Charisse's eyes held his, searching. "No one has ever seen me like this, Don. Not even Marcus when he claimed to love me. No one has noticed how I tuck my hair behind my ear when I'm nervous, or the way I dance a little when I think no one's watching." "I notice everything about you," Don admitted, the confession both terrifying and liberating. "Why? Didn't you tell me?" she asked. "All these months, all these feelings, kept in these pages instead of shared." Don's throat tightened. How could he explain the certainty of his unworthiness, the protective instinct to preserve their friendship rather than risk rejection? "I thought you deserved better," he finally said, the simple truth behind all his hesitation. "Someone more like you, outgoing, confident. Someone who wouldn't disappear into the background at parties or spend hours lost in his own head." Charisse's expression softened. "You think you'd disappear into the background? Don, you're the only person who stood up for me when this town turned on me, the only one who sees beyond what I show everyone else." She touched one of the sketches, a quiet moment of Charisse staring out the window, vulnerability evident in the set of her shoulders. "You see me even when I don't want to be seen." Confusion replaced Don's anxiety. "Are you saying—" The bakery phone rang, shattering the moment. Charisse sighed, standing to answer it. Don sat frozen, unable to process what had just occurred. What might have been about to occur. The call was brief but clearly important, Charisse's expression shifting from surprise to excitement. When she returned to the table, her energy had changed, a new brightness in her eyes. "That was Philippe Moreau," she said, naming a famous pastry chef Don recognized from her occasional mentions. "He's coming through town next week and wants to visit the bakery. He's considering featuring local businesses in his new cookbook." "Charisse, that's incredible," Don said, genuinely thrilled for her, despite his emotional whiplash. It could change. "Everything for the bakery," she agreed, her mind clearly already racing with preparations. She glanced at her watch. "I need to open in 10 minutes, and I have so much to plan." Don nodded, reaching for his sketchbook. "I should go." To his surprise, Charisse placed her hand over his, stopping him. "Leave it," she said softly. "My sketchbook. I haven't finished looking through it," she explained, "and I'd like to add something if that's okay." Bewildered but unable to deny her anything, Don nodded. "Of course." As he rose to leave, Charisse impulsively reached up and kissed his cheek, the brief contact sending electricity through his entire body. "Thank you for seeing me, Don Bradman," she whispered. Don walked out in a daze, his world tilted on its axis. Charisse had seen his deepest feelings laid bare and hadn't rejected him, had in fact seemed to welcome the revelation. What did it mean? What happened next? He spent the day distracted, unable to focus on work, replaying their conversation, the feel of her lips against his cheek. By evening, anticipation had him returning to the bakery just before closing time, the closed sign already hung on the door. But Charisse was visible inside, cleaning up. She smiled when she saw him, gesturing for him to enter. Don's sketchbook sat on the counter, a folded note tucked into its pages. Charisse pushed it toward him silently. "You added something?" Don asked, his voice rougher than intended. Charisse nodded. "Open it after you leave," she said, an uncharacteristic shyness in her expression. "Not here." Before Don could respond, her phone rang again. The same excitement lit her features as she answered, turning slightly away for privacy. Don took his sketchbook and left, more curious than he'd ever been in his life. Outside, he walked to the small park across from the bakery and sat on a bench beneath a flowering dogwood tree. With trembling fingers, he opened his sketchbook to where Charisse had placed her note. Written in elegant script on bakery stationery were the words, "The artist sees beauty where others see ordinary things." What might he create if he knew the subject of his art saw the same beauty in him? Don's heart pounded as he read and reread the message. Was Charisse saying what he thought she was saying? That she might feel something for him too? The possibility was too precious, too fragile to fully trust. But for the first time since falling in love with Charisse Smith, Don allowed himself to hope. His phone buzzed with a text from his boss, interrupting the moment. Pearson needed him in the office immediately. The Wainwright project had hit a snag, and the client was threatening to pull out. The crisis consumed the next 3 days, Don working almost around the clock to salvage the project. He managed to text Charisse that he was swamped with work, but would see her soon. She replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji, impossible to interpret. When Don finally resolved the Wainwright situation, his boss called him into his office Friday afternoon. "You saved our biggest client," Pearson said without preamble. "The Paris project is yours if you want it." Don blinked in surprise. Paris? 6 months overseeing the Devereux Hotel renovation. It's a career maker, Bradman. The kind of project that puts you on the map internationally. 6 months in Paris. 6 months away from Charisse. Just when something might be beginning between them. The timing couldn't have been worse. "When would I leave?" Don asked, already dreading the answer. "Monday morning. I know it's short notice, but they need someone on site immediately. 3 days. 3 days to decide whether to take the opportunity. Over lifetime, or stay for a chance at love that might not even exist." Don left work in a daze, driving straight to the bakery. But when he arrived, a sign on the door announced, "Closed for special event." Through the windows, he could see Charisse deep in conversation with a distinguished-looking man he assumed was Philippe Moreau, gesturing animatedly as she showed him around the kitchen. She looked radiant, passionate about her craft, on the cusp of her own big opportunity. Who was Don to intrude on that moment with his conflicted feelings, his impossible choice? He drove home slowly, the weight of decision heavy on his shoulders. Paris had always been his professional dream. The chance to work on a historic renovation in the world's most beautiful city was everything he'd worked toward. But Charisse, vibrant, kind, extraordinary Charisse, had become his personal dream, one that seemed suddenly, tantalizingly possible. That night, Don did what he always did when emotions overwhelmed him. He drew, not Charisse this time, but Paris, the city he'd studied in architectural school but never visited. The elegant buildings, the iconic landmarks, the city of light and love that called to him professionally. Beside these sketches, he drew his small town, the bakery with its striped awning, the park with its dogwood trees, the quiet streets he'd come to love. The place that held Charisse. When dawn broke, Don had made his decision. He would go to Paris, but not before telling Charisse exactly how he felt, not before asking if what they might have was worth waiting for. But when he arrived at her apartment, above the bakery early Saturday morning, her neighbor informed him Charisse had left at dawn for New York, something about a last-minute opportunity with the famous chef. She would be gone at least a week. Don's heart sank. He would be in Paris before she returned. Gathering his courage, Don wrote her a letter, not poetry this time, but simple, honest prose expressing everything in his heart. His love, his hope, his regret at the timing. He left it with his most recent sketch of her, wrapped in brown paper with her name carefully written on top. "I'll make sure she gets it," her neighbor promised, taking the package. As Don boarded the plane Monday morning, he carried with him the hope that when he returned from Paris in 6 months, Charisse Smith might be waiting. Her answer to his letter, held in those beautiful flower-dusted hands that had captured his heart from the very beginning. Chapter 5. Farewell, without words. Paris in autumn was everything Don had imagined, and nothing he could fully appreciate. The golden light on ancient stone, the Seine flowing beneath historic bridges, the architectural wonders that had inspired him since university, all were dimmed by thoughts of Charisse. 3 months had passed since he'd left home. 3 months, without her smile, her voice, her presence illuminating ordinary moments. His work on the Devereux Hotel renovation consumed his days, but nights found him sketching her from memory, writing letters he never sent. "You're homesick," his French colleague Mathieu observed one evening as they reviewed plans over dinner. "A woman, yes?" Don smiled faintly. "Is it that obvious?" Mathieu laughed. "You have the look of a man whose heart resides elsewhere. Tell me about her." So Don did. He described Charisse's bakery, her kindness, her resilience after the flood. The words poured out, a relief after months of keeping her memory private. "And she found your drawings?" Mathieu asked, refilling their wine glasses. "Yes." "She wasn't." "Agree, but I left before," Don sighed. Before we could figure out what it meant, Mathieu studied him thoughtfully. "You know, my friend, there is a difference between devotion and courage. One is feeling, the other is action." The words stayed with Don as he walked back to his small apartment near the project site. He had devoted himself to loving Charisse silently for so long that he'd almost forgotten the purpose of love. Not to admire from afar, but to connect, to share, to build something together. He had left her a letter before Paris, yes. But had it truly conveyed what was in his heart? Or had he hidden behind carefully chosen words, still afraid of full vulnerability? That night, Don baked. He had never been skilled in the kitchen, but he found himself attempting Charisse's apple pie from memory. The crust was too thick, the filling too sweet, but the act of creation felt like communion with her across the miles. As dawn broke over Paris, Don made a decision. He would send Charisse something more honest than letters, more revealing than drawings. He would show her who he was, completely. Over the next weeks, Don created a wooden box, carving it by hand in evening hours after work. On its lid, he etched the bakery's facade. Inside, he placed things that mattered. A sketch of his childhood. Home, a pressed flower from his grandmother's garden, a small watercolor of the Paris skyline painted from his apartment window, a piece of the architectural molding from the Devereux project salvaged from renovation debris, and recipes. His attempts to recreate her pastries, complete with notes about his failures and rare successes. The margins filled with observations about Paris bakeries, how none compared to hers. Finally, he added a hand-drawn calendar marking the months until his return, the final day circled in red. Don sealed the box with a simple note, "Until I return." Sending such a personal package was different from his previous anonymous gifts. This was Don revealing himself, not just his feelings for her. It terrified him, but Mathieu was right. Devotion without courage was incomplete. After dispatching the package, Don threw himself into his work with renewed focus. The hotel renovation progressed ahead of schedule, his designs for the historic property earning praise from both the clients and local preservation authorities. Yet each night, he found himself wondering, had Charisse received his box? What did she think of its contents? Was she waiting, or had she moved on? No response came. Don tried not to interpret the silence, reminding himself that he'd included no return address, had asked for nothing in his note. Still, hope and doubt battled within him as autumn deepened into winter. December brought unexpected news. The primary investor wanted to accelerate the project, which meant bringing in additional architects from the Home Office. Don's boss called from America. "They're impressed with your work, Bradman. So impressed that they want you back here to lead the Thompson development. It's bigger than the Devereux, a whole historical district renovation." "I thought I had 3 more months in Paris," Don said, surprised. "Plans change. This is a promotion." "Bradman, more money, more responsibility. You'd start immediately after New Year's." It meant returning home months earlier than expected, returning to Charisse. "I'll take it," Don said without hesitation. Christmas in Paris should have been magical, but Don spent it packing, making arrangements, tying up loose ends on the Devereux project. On Christmas Eve, he visited a small bakery near his apartment and purchased an apple tart. Sitting on a bench overlooking the Seine, he ate it slowly, thinking of Charisse and home. The flight home on December 30th was turbulent, mirroring Don's emotions. What would he find when he returned? Had his absence clarified or complicated whatever had begun between them? His plane landed during a snowstorm, the town blanketed in white as he drove from the airport. Despite the late hour and his exhaustion, Don found himself driving past the bakery. The windows were dark, but a holiday wreath hung on the door. Resisting the urge to knock on Charisse's apartment door above the shop, Don continued home. Tomorrow was soon enough to see her, to discover what their future might hold. But morning brought unexpected news. His boss called at dawn. "The Thompson clients want to meet today. I know you just got back, but this is crucial." The meeting ran into evening, then spawned another early the next day. New Year's Eve arrived with Don still caught in a whirlwind of professional obligations, unable to break away to visit the bakery. At his boss's insistence, Don attended the firm's New Year's party at the Grand Hotel downtown. He moved through the crowd of colleagues and clients automatically, his thoughts elsewhere, until a familiar laugh cut through the noise. Don turned, heart stopping at the sight of Charisse across the room. She wore a deep red dress that highlighted the rich warmth of her skin, her braids arranged in an elegant updo. She was speaking with Philippe Moreau, the famous chef, their conversation animated. She hadn't seen Don yet. He stood frozen, drinking in the sight of her after months of memories and sketches. She was more beautiful than he remembered, more vibrant, more real. Then she looked up, her eyes meeting his across the crowded room. Recognition, surprise, and something else. Something that made Don's pulse race crossed her face. The countdown to midnight began around them, but neither moved, locked in a moment outside of time. 10, 9, 8. Philippe said something to Charisse, drawing her attention away. She nodded, reluctance evident in her posture as she followed him toward the hotel terrace where other guests were gathering. Don started after her, determined not to lose her again, but his boss caught his arm. "Bradman, the Thompsons want to toast with you. Come on, this is your moment." Professional obligation warred with personal desire. Don glanced toward the terrace doors, already closing behind Charis, then back at his expectant boss. "I'm sorry," he said firmly. "There's somewhere I need to be." He moved through the crowd as the countdown reached 3, 2, 1. Cheers erupted, confetti fell, champagne flowed. Don pushed forward, focused only on reaching the terrace, reaching Charis. But when he burst through the doors, the terrace held dozens of celebrating guests, none of them Charis. Don searched frantically, circling the space twice before accepting. The truth, she was gone. Defeated, he leaned against the stone balustrade, watching fireworks illuminate the night sky. Another near miss, another moment slipped away. Would they ever find the right time, the right place? She left. Don turned to find Philippe Moreau beside him, offering a glass of champagne. "Excuse me?" "Charis," the chef clarified. "She saw you, coming and left. She asked me to give you a message." Hope and fear collided in Don's chest. "What message?" Philippe reached into his pocket and withdrew a small folded paper. "She said you would understand." Don unfolded the note with unsteady fingers. Inside was a simple drawing, the bakery with lights on inside, and tomorrow's date written beneath it. "She wants me to meet her," Don breathed, relief washing through him. Philippe nodded. "She speaks of you often, you know, the architect who sees beyond surfaces." His French accent made the words sound poetic. "Whatever you sent her from Paris, it moved her deeply." "You know Charis well?" Don couldn't help asking. "We are collaborating on a project," Philippe explained. "Her recipes will be featured in my new book. She is quite talented, your Charis." "She's not mine," Don said automatically. Philippe smiled knowingly. "Not yet, perhaps, but tomorrow," he raised his glass. "To new beginnings, monsieur." Don lifted his own glass, hope rekindling. In his heart, to new beginnings. As fireworks painted the sky with ephemeral beauty, Don allowed himself to imagine a future where his love for Charis was no longer silent, no longer unrequited. Tomorrow, they would finally have their moment, uninterrupted by circumstance or separation. Tomorrow, he would at last find the courage to match his devotion. Chapter 6. Distance makes the heart grow. Fonda Charis rose before dawn on New Year's Day, her hands already in motion, preparing dough for cinnamon rolls, croissants, her grandmother's special braided bread. Though the bakery was officially closed for the holiday, today required something special. Don was coming home. Don had returned. She had glimpsed him last night across the hotel ballroom, his tall figure unmistakable even in a crowd. The shock of seeing him months before she expected had stolen her breath. She'd fled, not from lack of desire to see him, but from overwhelming emotion that threatened to break her carefully maintained composure. Today would be different. Today she would welcome him properly, in her space, surrounded by the scents and tastes that formed the soundtrack of their relationship. As she worked, Charis's mind drifted to the wooden box that had arrived from Paris 3 months ago. She had opened it alone in her apartment, gasping at the intricate carving of her bakery on its lid. Inside, she had discovered pieces of Don's soul, artifacts of his life, his memories, his time in Paris. The calendar with its countdown of days had occupied a place of honor on her bedside table. Each night before sleep, she had marked off another day, another step closer to his return. Now he was here months early, and Charis still wasn't certain she was ready. The bell above the door chimed at precisely noon, though the closed sign still hung in the window. Charisse looked up from arranging pastries on her grandmother's best china to find Don standing in the entranceway, snow dusting his dark coat, uncertainty in his eyes. "You're early," she said softly, echoing words from their very first meeting. "I couldn't wait," he replied simply. They stood looking at each other across the bakery, months of separation dissolving in the warmth between them. Don appeared different somehow, more confident in his posture, more open in his expression. Paris had changed him, or perhaps being away from her had. "Your box," Charisse said, breaking the silence. "It was beautiful." "You kept it?" Hope colored his voice. Charisse nodded, moving from behind the counter. "I kept everything you ever gave me. The sketches, the rare spices, the rolling pin. I knew they were from you, Don. I always knew." Surprise flickered across his face. "How? No one else sees me the way you do," she said, taking another step toward him. "No one else notices the details that matter to me." Don's expression softened. "I thought I was being so careful, so secretive." "Your gifts revealed more than you knew." Charisse gestured to the table she had prepared with fresh pastries and coffee. "I made all your favorites." They sat together, the familiar ritual of sharing food creating a bridge across the months apart. Don told her about Paris, about the Devereux renovation, about coming home early for the Thompson project. Charisse shared stories of working with Philippe, how her recipes would be featured in his new cookbook, bringing national attention to her small bakery. "I'm proud of you," Don said, his sincerity evident. "You deserve all of it." "So do you," Charisse replied. "Your talent has always been exceptional." As they talked, the distance between them gradually closed, not just physically, but emotionally. The awkwardness of reunion gave way to the comfort of two people who knew each other's rhythms, who had missed those rhythms in their absence. "I missed this place while I was gone," Don admitted, looking around the bakery. "But mostly I missed you." Charisse's heart quickened. "I missed you too. The bakery felt empty without you in your corner sketching." "About those sketches." Don hesitated. "Charisse, the note you left in my book before I went to Paris. Did you mean it? That I see beauty in you too?" She met his gaze steadily. "Yes." Don seemed to gather his courage. "When I saw my sketchbook in your hands that day, I was terrified. You'd be angry, disgusted even, finding out you weren't, that you might feel something too. It was the most amazing moment of my life." He paused, and then we both had to leave before we could figure out what it meant. "What do you think it means?" Charisse asked softly. The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Don reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "I think it means I've been in love with you since that first rainy day," he said, his voice low but unwavering. "And that perhaps against all odds, you might feel something for me too." Charisse turned her hand to clasp his fully. "Not against all odds, Don, because of who you are. Because you defended me when others believed the worst. Because you see beauty in ordinary moments. Because your heart shows in everything you create." She squeezed his hand gently. "I've watched you watching me all these months. I felt your eyes, following me, appreciating me, seeing me as no one else does. At first I didn't understand it, but then I began to look for you, to feel disappointed on days you didn't come in." "Really?" Wonder filled Don's expression. "Really?" Charisse smiled. "I started baking things I thought you'd like, wearing colors I noticed you sketching more often, hoping you'd find the courage to speak, or that I would." "Why didn't you?" Don asked. Charisse's smile turned wistful. "The same reason you didn't, I think. Fear of breaking what we already had. Fear that I was misreading the signs." She took a deep breath. "And then there was New York." "New York." Don's brow furrowed in confusion. setting down her coffee cup. Charisse explained, "The week you left for Paris, Philippe offered me a chance to study with him in New York. 6 months of advanced training, connections with the best pastry chefs in the country. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Understanding dawned in Don's eyes. "That's why you weren't here when I came to say goodbye." Charisse nodded. "I had 24 hours to decide. I went to New York to see the program, to talk with Philippe in person." She looked down at their joined hands. "By the time I returned, you were gone. Did you take it? The opportunity?" "No." Charisse met his gaze again. "I couldn't leave the bakery for that long. My grandmother built this place from nothing. It's her legacy." Don's expression was troubled. "Charisse, I would never want you to miss an opportunity like that because of me." "It wasn't because of you," she corrected gently. "Or not only because of you. It was about choosing what matters most to me." Her thumb traced patterns on his palm. "Philippe understood. That's why he's featuring my recipes instead. Why he's helping me expand the bakery's reach from here." Relief softened Don's features. "When I saw you with him last night, I thought perhaps that we were together." Charisse laughed softly. "No, Philippe is happily married to his childhood sweetheart. He's been my mentor, nothing more." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands still joined across the table, the connection between them strengthening with each passing second. "So what happens now?" Don finally asked, the question encompassing all the possibilities before them. Charisse considered him thoughtfully. "Now we stop watching from a distance. We stop leaving notes and sending gifts without signing our names. We stop being afraid of what might happen and find out what will happen." "I'd like that," Don said, his voice rough with emotion. "So would I." Charisse stood, tugging him gently to his feet. "I have something to show you." She led him behind the counter, through the kitchen to a door he'd never seen open. Inside was a small, sunlit room overlooking the garden behind the bakery. "My grandmother's private bake shop," Charisse explained, "where she developed her special recipes, away from curious eyes." The room held a small work table, an antique oven, shelves of ingredients in glass jars, but what caught Don's attention were the walls, covered with his sketches, arranged carefully in chronological order. Every drawing he'd given her anonymously, every scrap of beauty he'd created for her, preserved and displayed with obvious care. "You kept them all," he whispered, overwhelmed. "Each one helped me see myself through your eyes," Charisse said, moving to stand beside him. "Each one taught me something about how deeply a person can be known, can be cherished, even from a distance." Don turned to her, emotion making his voice unsteady. "Charisse, She placed a finger gently against his lips. "I know," she said simply. "I've always known, even when you couldn't say it." Slowly, giving him time to withdraw if he wished, Charisse raised herself on tiptoe and replaced her finger with her lips. The kiss was gentle, a question as much as an answer, an invitation to the future rather than a conclusion. Don responded with equal gentleness, his hands coming up to frame her face as if she were precious beyond measure. When they parted, his eyes held wonder and a question of his own. "Is this real?" he whispered against her lips. "It's real," Charisse assured him, her hands steady on his shoulders. "It's been real for longer than either of us has been willing to admit." Outside, snow began falling again, coating the world in hushed beauty. But inside Charisse's grandmother's bake shop, surrounded by evidence of a devotion too long left unspoken, a different kind of beauty was blossoming. The beauty of silence finally broken, of distance finally crossed, of hearts finally revealed. And as Don drew Charisse back into his arms for another kiss, deeper and more certain than the first, both knew that whatever challenges awaited them, his work, her bakery, the complications of two independent lives merging, they would face them together, with the same quiet strength that had sustained their silent devotion through all the months of waiting. Chapter 7. Crossed paths. Winter melted into spring, bringing with it a blossoming relationship between Don and Charis. Their days maintained their previous rhythms, Don at his architecture firm, Charis at her bakery, but their evenings and weekends belonged to each other. Don still sketched Charis, but now openly, sometimes as she kneaded dough in her kitchen, other times as she dozed on his couch after dinner. She no longer pretended not to notice, instead often asking to see his work, delighting in how he captured moments she would have thought ordinary. "You make everything beautiful," she told him. One evening as they walked through the park, cherry blossoms drifting around them like pink snow. "I just draw what I see," Don replied, squeezing her hand. Life felt perfect, or nearly so. The only shadow was Don's increasing workload on the Thompson project. As lead architect, he worked longer hours, often missing their dinner plans, arriving at her apartment exhausted, with just enough energy to kiss her before falling asleep. Charis understood. Her own business was thriving, especially since Philippe's cookbook featuring her recipes had been published. Tourists now visited the bakery, some traveling hours just to taste her famous apple pie. "We're both living our dreams," she reminded Don when he apologized for another cancelled date. "That's something to celebrate, not apologize for." Still, they both felt the strain of success pulling them in different directions, which made the unexpected opportunity all the more tempting when it arrived. "Paris?" Charis repeated, looking at Don across her kitchen table where he'd just shared the news. "They want you back in Paris?" Don nodded, his expression conflicted. "The Devereux client was impressed with my work. They've acquired another historic property and want me to oversee its conversion into a boutique hotel." "That's wonderful," Charis said sincerely. "You deserve the recognition." "It would be 6 months, maybe longer," Don said, watching her carefully. "I'd have to leave in 3 weeks, 6 months apart, just when they'd found each other." The thought sent a pang through Charis's chest, but she maintained her smile. "You have to take it. It's an incredible opportunity." "I haven't said yes yet," Don replied. "I wanted to talk to you first." Charis reached for his hand. "Don, I would never ask you to give up something like this for me." "What if—" Don hesitated, then continued in a rush. "What if you came with me?" The question hung in the air between them, full of possibility and complication. "To Paris?" Charis's mind raced. "But the bakery, you could study with French pastry chefs," Don suggested. "Maybe even work with some of Philippe's contacts. You've always wanted to learn traditional European techniques." It was tempting, Paris with Don, combining love and professional growth. But Charis thought of her grandmother's legacy, the bakery that had been in her family for generations. "I'd need time to think about it," she said finally, "to figure out if it's even possible." Don nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, there's no rush." But there was. 3 weeks was barely enough time to make arrangements for either outcome, Charis going to Paris or staying behind. They tabled the discussion for the evening, focusing instead on enjoying their time together. Yet the question hovered between them, unresolved. The next morning, Charis called Tessa, her young assistant who had grown into a skilled baker over the past year. "Would you be interested in managing the bakery while I'm gone, potentially for 6 months?" Tessa's enthusiasm was immediate. "Are you kidding? I'd love to." "But where are you going?" "Paris, maybe," Charis explained. "With Don. He's been offered a project there." "That's so romantic," Tessa gushed. "Like a movie." Charis smiled at the girl's excitement. "It's a big decision. The bakery is my responsibility." "And you've trained me well," Tessa reminded her. "Plus, I could video call you if I have questions. Technology exists for a reason." The conversation left Charis feeling lighter. Perhaps it was possible. Perhaps she could have both, adventure with Don, and preservation of her grandmother's legacy. That weekend, Don took Charisse to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. He seemed nervous, checking his pocket repeatedly, making Charisse wonder if he was planning to propose. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. They had only been together a few months, though they had known each other much longer. "I have something for you," Don said after dessert, reaching into his pocket. Instead of a ring box, he produced a small envelope. Inside was a plane ticket to Paris, dated 3 weeks away. "Don?" Charisse breathed, staring at the ticket. "You already bought it. It's refundable," he assured her quickly. "I'm not pressuring you. I just wanted you to know how much I want you with me." His eyes held hers across the table. "I love you, Charisse. The thought of being apart again is unbearable." Tears pricked at Charisse's eyes. "I love you too." She touched the ticket gently. "And I want to come. I've been talking to Tessa about managing the bakery." Relief and joy transformed Don's expression. "Really? You'll come?" "I think so," Charisse said, still cautious. "I need to finalize arrangements, make sure Tessa is really ready. But yes, Don, I want to be with you in Paris." The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Charisse trained Tessa intensively, documented recipes, contacted suppliers. Don sublet his house to a colleague, arranged international phone service, packed his architectural materials. Everything was proceeding smoothly until 5 days before their departure, when disaster struck. "Tessa's been in an accident," Mrs. Peterson informed Charisse over the phone. "Broke her wrist in 2 places. Poor girl won't be using that hand for months." Charisse's heart sank. Without Tessa, there was no one qualified to run the bakery. Her dream of Paris with Don crumbled before her eyes. When she told him that evening, Don took the news with admirable grace. "We'll figure something out," he promised. "Maybe I can postpone the project." But they both knew he couldn't. The clients had set deadlines, contractors had been hired, permits secured. Don had to go to Paris with or without her. "I'll come later," Charisse suggested desperately. "Once I find someone else to manage the bakery." They clung to this hope over the next few days, making new plans. Don would go ahead. Charisse would join him in a month or 2. They would video call daily, send letters and packages like before. "It's not ideal," Don acknowledged the night before. His flight, holding Charisse close in her apartment. "But it's temporary. We'll be together soon." Charisse nodded against his chest, trying to believe it. But something told her life rarely worked out so neatly, that plans had a way of crumbling beneath the weight of reality. The next morning, she drove Don to the airport, maintaining a brave smile as they said goodbye at security. Their kiss was desperate, both trying to memorize the feel of each other before separation. "I'll call when I land," Don promised, reluctantly releasing her. "I love you," Charisse replied, forcing herself not to cry until he had disappeared through the security gate. The drive home was the longest of her life, each mile stretching her further from Don. The bakery, when she arrived, felt empty despite the morning crowd. She went through the motions mechanically, smiling at customers, fulfilling orders, all while a piece of her heart winged its way across the Atlantic. 2 days later, an unexpected visitor arrived at the bakery just before closing. Eliza Montgomery, an elegant woman in her 50s who had been Charisse's instructor at culinary school. "Charisse, my dear," Eliza greeted her with a warm hug. "I was passing through and simply had to see this bakery Felipe has been raving about." Over tea in the back room, Eliza revealed she had recently retired from teaching and was at loose ends. "I'm too young to just garden all day," she laughed. "I need a project." An idea formed in Charisse's mind. "What if I had a project for you, one that would use all your expertise?" By the end of their conversation, an arrangement had been made. Eliza would manage the bakery for 6 months, allowing Charisse to join Don in Paris. Heart racing with excitement, Charisse called Don's cell phone the moment Eliza left. No answer. It was the middle of the night in Paris. She sent a text instead. Found someone to run the bakery. Eliza Montgomery, my former culinary instructor, will manage everything for 6 months. We'll book flight for next week. Call me. Don's response came hours later, oddly brief. Great news. Will call tonight. When he did call, his voice sounded strained. Charisse, something's happened. The Devereux Company had merged with a larger firm. The new management had different ideas for the Paris property. Don's design approach was deemed too traditional, and just 3 days after arriving, he had been replaced on the project. They're sending me back to the States, he explained, exhaustion evident in his voice. But not home. They want me in New York, overseeing the renovation of their American headquarters. New York? Charisse repeated, stunned by this new development. At least a year commitment, Don confirmed. Starting immediately, silence stretched between them, both absorbing the implications. Don's plans had collapsed, just as Charisse's path to Paris had cleared. I could come to New York instead, Charisse suggested. Though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't so simple. Eliza had agreed to 6 months, not a year. And New York wasn't Paris. Charisse had no professional contacts there, no clear opportunity to advance her skills. We need to think this through, Don said finally. Not make hasty decisions. Let me get settled in New York. See what the situation really is. They ended the call with declarations of love and promises to figure things out. But as Charisse lay awake that night, she couldn't help feeling that fate was conspiring against them, creating a cruel joke of crossed paths and missed connections. The next morning, Charisse called Eliza and explained the situation. I understand if you want to withdraw your offer, she concluded. Nonsense, Eliza replied. I'm still available to help. In fact, she paused thoughtfully. I have connections at Le Bernardin in New York. Their pastry chef might be interested. In your apple pie technique, hope flickered in Charisse's chest. You think there could be an opportunity for me there? Let me make some calls, Eliza promised. But when she called back 2 days later, it was with disappointing news. The position was just filled. I'm so sorry, dear. Charisse accepted the setback with outward grace, thanking Eliza for trying. Inside, however, her heart ached with the growing certainty that she and Don were being pulled in opposite directions by forces beyond their control. That night, as she closed the bakery alone, Charisse found herself drawn to the small room where she displayed Don's sketches. Looking at them now, her face, her hands, her bakery captured in his precise, loving strokes, she felt both closer to him and impossibly distant. One drawing in particular caught her eye, Don's vision of her dream bakery, larger and more elegant than her current space, with a teaching kitchen and cafe seating. He had sketched it months ago, when they first began discussing their hopes for the future. Staring at that drawing, an idea began to form in Charisse's mind. A way to honor her grandmother's legacy while creating something new. A path that might allow her and Don to find their way back to each other, not through compromise, but through growth. She reached for her phone, heart pounding with renewed purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever distance separated them, temporarily, Charisse refused to believe their story would end with crossed paths and missed connections. Don answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for her call. Charisse, I have an idea, she said without preamble, about us, about the future. And as she began to explain her vision, miles away in New York, Don found himself reaching for his sketchbook, ready to help build a new dream, one that might finally bring them together for good. Chapter 8. The Revelation. 6 months passed with Don in New York and Charisse at her bakery, their relationship sustained by daily video calls, weekend visits when possible, and a shared vision for the future. The separation was difficult, but unlike their previous time apart, they now faced it as partners, their commitment to each other unwavering despite the distance. Charis's idea had been ambitious: expand her bakery into the vacant building next door, creating a space that combined cafe, teaching kitchen, and traditional bakery. Don had embraced the concept, sending architectural drawings, consulting with contractors remotely, his professional expertise supporting her dream even from afar. The permits came through, Charis told Don during their evening call, her excitement evident even through the small screen. Construction can start next month. That's wonderful news, Don replied, his smile tired but genuine. The New York project had been demanding, requiring long hours and constant problem-solving. I wish I could be there for the groundbreaking. You saw. Will be, Charis assured him, in spirit and through your designs. This expansion wouldn't be happening without you. Their conversation continued as it always did, sharing daily triumphs and frustrations, making plans for Don's visit the following weekend, maintaining the connection that sustained them both through the separation. After ending the call, Charis reviewed Don's latest architectural drawings for the expansion. His talent was evident in every line, every thoughtful detail that showed how well he understood her vision and needs. The teaching kitchen positioned to catch morning light, the display cases arranged for optimal customer flow, the small office with a window overlooking the garden, all reflected Don's careful attention to what would make the space not just beautiful, but functional. The next morning, Charis received an unexpected call from Philippe Moreau. Charis, ma chère, I have magnificent news, the chef announced without preamble. My publisher wishes to do a feature on bakers from my cookbook, a full spread in Culinary Arts magazine, very prestigious. That's wonderful, Philippe, Charis replied, genuinely pleased. The cookbook had already boosted her business considerably. They wish to interview you next week, Philippe continued. They were most impressed with your apple pie technique. After arranging the details, Charis called Eliza to share the news. The older woman had become not just a colleague, but a friend. Her experience invaluable as Charis navigated the expansion plans. A national magazine feature. How exciting, Eliza exclaimed. We should prepare some special items for the photographer to capture. The next week passed in a flurry of activity, perfecting recipes, cleaning every surface of the bakery until it gleamed, selecting the perfect items to showcase. Don called daily, offering encouragement and sharing her excitement. From afar, the interview itself went better than Charis could have hoped. The journalist, a sophisticated woman named Simone, asked thoughtful questions about Charis's background, her techniques, and her vision for the bakery's future. Your expansion plans are impressive, Simone remarked, reviewing the architectural renderings. The design has a wonderful balance of form and function. My partner created them, Charis explained, pride warming her voice. He's an architect with an exceptional eye for detail. You're fortunate to have such support, Simone observed. Many chefs struggle to find partners who understand their professional demands. I am fortunate, Charis agreed, thinking of how Don had embraced her dream, contributing his skills without trying to take over or redirect her vision. We've had our challenges with distance, but we're building something meaningful together, both personally and professionally. The conversation shifted to Charis's techniques, her grandmother's influence, her plans for the teaching kitchen. The photographer captured her hands shaping dough, arranging pastries, the concentrated expression on her face as she worked. One last question, Simone said as they concluded. What advice would you give to aspiring bakers? Charis considered carefully before answering. Trust your instincts, but remain open to learning. There's wisdom in traditional methods, yet innovation comes from being willing to experiment. She smiled, thinking of her journey with Don. And find people who believe in your vision, who see the beauty in what you're creating, even when others might not understand it yet. After the interview team departed, Charis felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She called Don immediately, wanting to share every detail while it was still fresh. "You'll be incredible in the article," he assured her. "I'm so proud of you, Charisse." "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she replied honestly. "Your support, your designs for the expansion, you've helped make all of it possible." "We're a team," Don said simply. "Your dreams are my dreams." Those words stayed with Charisse in the weeks that followed, a reminder of how completely their lives had intertwined despite the physical distance between them. Don's weekend visit passed too quickly, both of them acutely aware of the countdown, until his departure back to New York. 6 more months, he reminded her as they said goodbye at the airport. "Then the project ends, and I'll be home for good." Charisse nodded, holding back tears as she kissed him farewell. 6 months seemed simultaneously brief and eternal. A small fraction of a lifetime together, yet an eternity to spend apart. Construction on the bakery expansion began, giving Charisse little time to dwell on Don's absence. Each day brought new decisions, new challenges, new progress. She sent Don photos and videos, keeping him connected to the project he had helped design. His advice guided her through contractor disagreements and unexpected structural issues, his calm perspective balancing her occasional frustration with delays. 3 months later, the upcoming issue of Culinary Arts magazine arrived in Charisse's mailbox. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, turning to the featured article, "Rising Stars, New Voices in Traditional Baking." Her breath caught at the full-page photograph that opened the spread. Charisse in profile, sunlight streaming. Through the bakery window, her hands expertly crimping a pie crust. The image captured something essential about her, a quiet passion and focus that defined her approach to her craft. The article itself was beautifully written, describing Charisse's journey from her grandmother's kitchen to her own successful bakery, highlighting her unique techniques and vision. But what made her heart race was a particular passage near the end. Smith speaks of her architectural partner with evident admiration, crediting his designs for the ambitious expansion currently underway. He sees possibilities where others see limitations, she explains. "His sketches taught me I was beautiful exactly as I am." This sentiment echoes through Smith's approach to traditional recipes, honoring their essence while confidently introducing her own perspective. A balance of respect and innovation that defines her unique contribution to the culinary world. Charisse read the passage again, heart pounding. She had never said those exact words during the interview. They were from the note she had left in Don's sketchbook nearly a year ago, words meant only for him. Confused, she scanned the article, credits, noticing the photographer's name for the first time, Don Bradman. Impossible. Don was in New York, not working as a photographer for culinary magazines. Yet there was his name in black and white. With shaking fingers, Charisse dialed Don's number. When he answered, she asked without preamble, "Did you submit photographs to Culinary Arts magazine for an article about me?" A long pause, then Don's voice, cautious and confused. "No, why? There's a photographer credited as Don Bradman. And the article quotes something I never said to the interviewer, words from the note I left in your sketchbook." Another pause, longer this time. "That's strange. What exactly does it say?" Charisse read him the passage. When she finished, Don's breathing was audible through the phone. "Charisse, I think you should sit down," he said finally. "There's something I need to tell you." A coldness settled in Charisse's stomach. "What is it?" "When I was in Paris the first time," Don began hesitantly, "I received a strange email from someone claiming to be a journalist. They said they were writing a profile about emerging architects and wanted information about my work. I answered some questions, sent some photographs of projects." "What does that have to do with this article?" Charisse asked, still confused. One of their questions was about inspiration. I mentioned you, not by name, but I described this amazing baker who inspired me, whose dedication to her craft pushed me to be better at mine. I might have quoted your note about seeing beauty. Don's voice was apologetic. I never heard anything after sending my responses, assumed it was some kind of scam. I forgot about it completely. But how would that end? Up in this article about me, Charisse pressed. I don't know, Don admitted. It doesn't make sense, unless someone had deliberately connected them, someone who knew them both. Philippe, Charisse said suddenly, the pieces clicking into place. He knows both of us. He was in Paris while you were there. He's connected to the culinary magazine. World. You think Philippe orchestrated this? Don sounded bewildered. But why? Before Charisse could respond, her call waiting beeped. Philippe himself was calling. It's him right now, she told Don. Let me call you back. She switched to Philippe's call, trying to keep her voice neutral. Hello, Philippe. Ah, Charisse. You have received the magazine, yes? The chef's voice was jovial, with an undercurrent of anticipation. What do you think of the lovely article? It's beautiful, Charisse said carefully, though I'm confused about some things. The photographer's credit, for instance. A beat of silence. Then Philippe chuckled. Ah, you noticed that. I wondered. If you would. Philippe, what did you do? The chef sighed dramatically. I merely, how do you say, connected some dots. When I met your Don in Paris last year, he spoke of a baker he adored from his hometown. The way he described her, with such passion, such devotion, I knew immediately it was you. Charisse's breath caught. You knew? All this time? Of course. The coincidence was too perfect to ignore. Philippe's voice softened. When he showed me his sketches of this woman, of you, I recognized not just your face, but the depth of feeling behind the drawings. True love is rare, ma chère. I could not stand by, while two souls, clearly meant for each other, suffered from unnecessary separation. So you, what, interviewed Don under false pretenses, gave his quotes to Simone for my article. Charisse was still trying to process the manipulation. A small deception for a greater good, Philippe confirmed unapologetically. Don's words about you were too beautiful to remain private. And now, perhaps, you both see what I saw immediately, that your connection transcends ordinary romance. You inspire each other's greatest work. After ending the call with Philippe, Charisse sat motionless, overwhelmed by the revelation. The magazine lay open beside her, her own face looking back from glossy pages, words she'd never spoken in print beneath her image. Yet they were her words, in a sense, words she had written to Don in a moment of vulnerability, recognizing how he saw beauty where others saw ordinary things. Her phone rang again, Don calling back. She answered immediately. Philippe confessed, she said before Don could speak. He's been playing matchmaker since Paris, apparently. He interviewed you under false pretenses and gave your quotes to the magazine. I should be angry, Don replied after a moment. But I can't bring myself to care about his methods when the result is so perfect. Perfect? Charisse repeated, surprised. The article captured exactly what I feel about you, Charisse, Don said simply. How you inspire me, how watching you pursue excellence makes me want to be better. If Philippe had asked directly, I would have told him the same things. A warmth spread through Charisse's chest, chasing away the chill of manipulation. I feel the same way about you. Your designs for the expansion. They're not just beautiful, they're thoughtful. They show how deeply you understand what matters. To me, we create better things together than apart, Don said, a note of realization in his voice. Even with the distance between us, we're building something remarkable. Charisse touched the magazine photo, then glanced at the architectural. Plans spread across her table, tangible evidence of their intertwined creative lives. Philippe might have manipulated us, but he wasn't wrong about one thing. What we have is rare and worth protecting, Don added firmly, which is why I've made a decision. I'm coming home, Charisse. But your project, I can complete the final phase remotely, Don interrupted. I've already spoken with my boss. 3 more weeks to transition my team, then I'm home for good. Joy burst through Charisse like sunrise after endless night. Really? You're sure? I've never been more certain of anything, Don replied, conviction strong in his voice. The New York skyline can't compete with watching you create in your bakery. The biggest architectural projects mean nothing compared to building a life with you. Tears filled Charisse's eyes, happiness overwhelming her usual composure. 3 weeks, she whispered. Then no more separation. No more separation, Don agreed softly. Just you and me and whatever we decide to create together. As they talked, into the night, making plans for Don's return, for the bakery expansion, for their future, Charisse felt a profound gratitude, not just for Philippe's well-intentioned meddling, but for the revelation it had brought. Their love wasn't just about romantic feelings or physical attraction. It was a creative partnership, each elevating the other's work, each seeing possibilities the other might miss. Their separation, painful as it had been, had paradoxically strengthened this aspect of their bond, forcing them to collaborate across distance, to trust each other's vision when they couldn't be physically present. And now, with Don coming home at last, Charisse knew they would build something extraordinary together, a life where devotion, once silent, could find expression in every shared creation, every collaborative dream, every moment of beauty recognized and celebrated together. Chapter 9. The Missed Connection. 3 weeks stretched endlessly as Charisse prepared for Don's return. The remote work arrangement he'd negotiated meant he could complete the final phase of the Thompson project from home, while still having time for her and the bakery expansion. She threw herself into preparations, working long hours to distract from the anticipation that thrummed through her veins. Each night they spoke on video calls that grew increasingly intimate. I miss the scent of your skin, Don confessed one evening, his voice low and rough in a way that sent heat coursing through Charisse. The way you smell like vanilla and cinnamon even after showering. I miss your hands, Charisse replied, emboldened by the darkness of her bedroom, the distance between them somehow making honesty easier. Your artist's hands, I dream about them touching me. Their conversations ignited a longing more powerful than anything Charisse had experienced during their previous separation. Perhaps because this time they allowed themselves to speak of desire, of the physical connection they both craved. The night before Don's flight home, Charisse could barely sleep. She imagined his homecoming, the moment their bodies would finally connect without hesitation or interruption. The thought of his hands, those beautiful hands that drew her so perfectly, exploring her skin, made her restless with anticipation. Morning brought unexpected chaos. A severe storm system grounded flights across the Northeast, including Don's from New York. His desperate call came just as Charisse was preparing to leave for the airport. All flights are cancelled until at least tomorrow, he explained. Frustration evident in his voice. I've already rebooked, but the earliest I can get there is Thursday. 2 more days. After months apart, 2 days shouldn't matter, yet disappointment crashed through Charisse with surprising force. It's just a little longer, she said, keeping her tone light despite the ache in her chest. We've waited this long. Later. That day, Charisse received alarming news from her contractor. The recent heavy rains had revealed a serious structural issue in the bakery's expansion. The old foundation's compromised, he explained, pointing to where water pooled in the newly excavated area. We need to stabilize it before proceeding, but honestly, I'm not sure the current design will work with the conditions we're seeing. Charisse felt panic rising. She knew buildings, knew baking, but structural engineering was beyond her expertise. She called Don immediately, explaining the situation in halting terms. "Send me photos," he instructed calmly. "As many angles as possible." An hour later, Don called back. "It's fixable, but the design needs modification. I can draft something. Quickly, but it would be better if I could see it in person. You'll be here Thursday," Charisse reminded him. "Can it wait?" Don's hesitation was answer enough. Every day of delay costs money, and more rain could worsen the problem. The solution was obvious, if painful. "You should go straight to the architectural firm when you land," Charisse said. "Work on the revised plans there. They'll have everything you need." "That means not seeing you until evening," Don protested. "I've waited months," Charisse reminded him softly. "I can wait a few more hours for you to save my bakery." Thursday dawned clear and bright. Charisse received Don's text that his plane had landed safely, followed by confirmation that he was heading directly to the architectural firm as planned. She threw herself into bakery work, creating elaborate pastries that required complete concentration, anything to make the hours pass faster. Evening approached, the bakery now closed, as Charisse prepared for Don's arrival. She had changed into a simple blue dress that highlighted her curves, applied a touch of makeup, arranged her braids in the style he had once sketched and called regal. Her apartment above the bakery was clean, candles lit, the bed made with fresh linens, perfect for a reunion 6 months in the making. Don's text came at 7. "Still at the firm. Structural solution more complicated than I thought. Don't wait." Up. Disappointment crashed through Charisse. She typed several responses, deleting each one before simply responding, "Be safe. I love you." Sleep evaded her as she lay alone in her prepared bed, the candles burning down to puddles of wax. Rationally, she understood the necessity of Don's work. Emotionally, she felt the bitter sting of yet another delay. Morning came with no word from Don. Charisse called his cell, received no answer, then tried the architectural firm. The receptionist informed her that Don had worked through the night and left at dawn, taking the revised plans with him. Confused, Charisse tried Don's cell again. Still no answer. Where could he be? The answer came unexpectedly when Charisse visited the expansion site later that morning. There, amid the mud and construction materials, stood Don. His back was to her as he gestured to the contractor, pointing at areas on the revised blueprints spread across a makeshift table. He looked exhausted, his clothes rumpled, dark circles visible under his eyes even from a distance. But to Charisse, he had never been more beautiful, intense, focused, using his talents to save her dream. She approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt. Don sensed her presence anyway, turning as if drawn by some invisible force. When their eyes met, everything else disappeared. The construction site, the contractor, the structural problems. There was only Don and Charisse, finally in the same place, after months apart. "You're here," he said, his voice rough with fatigue and emotion. Charisse nodded, suddenly shy despite all their intimate conversations, all their planning for this moment. "I was worried when you didn't call." "I wanted to surprise you," Don explained, gesturing to the blueprints. "To fix this before you saw me, to make everything perfect." "Don," Charisse said softly, moving closer. "It's already perfect because you're here." The contractor discreetly stepped away, giving them privacy as Don closed the distance between them. His hands, those artist's hands Charisse had dreamed about, cradled her face with exquisite tenderness. "I've imagined this moment for months," he whispered, his breath warm against her lips. "Being able to touch you whenever I want." Charisse's hands found his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath his rumpled shirt. "Then touch me," she invited, tilting her face up to his. Their lips met in a kiss that began gently but quickly blazed into something more desperate, months of separation igniting into urgent need. Don's hands slid from her face to her shoulders, down her back, pulling her tightly against him as if he could erase the memory of distance with the press of their bodies. Carice responded with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body arching into his, a soft sound of pleasure escaping her throat when his lips moved to explore the sensitive skin of her neck. "Not here," she gasped, suddenly remembering their public location. "My apartment." They barely made it through her door before passion overwhelmed them again. Don pressed Carice against the wall, his kisses hungry and deep, his hands exploring the curves of her body with reverent urgency. She welcomed his touch, her own hands busy unbuttoning his shirt, desperate to feel his skin against hers. "I need you," Don murmured against her collarbone, the simple admission more powerful than any elaborate declaration could have been. "I've needed you for so long." "I'm yours," Carice replied, guiding him toward her bedroom, where the evidence of last night's disappointed preparations remained. The unrumpled bed, the burned-out candles. "I've always been yours." The morning light filtered through curtains. Carice had forgotten to close, illuminating their reunion with golden warmth. Don laid her gently on the bed, his eyes drinking in the sight of her with undisguised adoration. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered," he said, his voice filled with wonder as he joined her, their bodies fitting together as if designed for each other. What followed was a passionate exploration, each discovering the other's body, with touches that ranged from whisper-soft to desperately urgent. Don's artist's hands mapped Carice's curves with exquisite attention to detail, finding places that made her gasp and arch beneath him. Carice's baker's hands, strong from years of kneading dough, claimed Don with equal thoroughness, learning the terrain of his body by touch and taste. Their first joining was intense, months of separation making them almost frantic with need. The second time was slower, more deliberate, each savoring the discovery of the other's pleasure. By the third, they moved together with the synchronicity of longtime lovers, anticipating each other's desires, creating something beautiful from their connection. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets damp with exertion, Carice's head pillowed. On Don's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Worth the wait?" Don asked, a hint of masculine pride in his voice. Carice laughed softly, pressing a kiss to his chest, where his heart beat steady beneath her lips. "Worth every second," she assured him, "though I don't intend to wait that long ever again." Don's arms tightened around her. "No more separations," he agreed. "No more missed connections." But fate, it seemed, had one final test for their devotion. Later, that day, as they finally ventured out of bed to address their neglected hunger, Don's phone rang. His boss from New York calling with an unexpected crisis. "The Thompson client hates the final designs," Don explained after ending the call. "They're threatening to walk if we don't make major revisions immediately." Carice felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. "You have to go back, don't you?" Don looked torn, his eyes moving from Carice to the blueprints for her bakery. Expansion still rolled up on her kitchen counter. "The Thompson project is the firm's biggest client. If they pull out, you could lose your job," Carice finished for him. "I understand." And she did understand, intellectually. But emotionally, the thought of Don leaving again, just hours after their passionate reunion, was almost unbearable. "It would only be for a week," Don said, already mentally calculating. "Just long enough to smooth things over, present alternative designs. Then I'd be back for good." A week. After months apart, after finally connecting in every way, now another separation loomed. It seemed like a cruel joke. "When would you leave?" Carice asked, steeling herself for the answer. Don checked his phone. "There's a flight at 6 tonight. I could make it if I leave within the hour." An hour, 60 minutes to absorb the joy of reunion before facing goodbye again. Charisse felt tears threatening but forced them back. Don didn't need her guilt or sadness weighing on him when he already faced a professional crisis. Then you should pack, she said, summoning a supportive smile. Just promise me one thing. Anything, Don replied immediately. Charisse stepped closer, her hands finding his, her eyes holding his gaze intently. Promise you'll come back to me, no matter what happens with the Thompson project, no matter what opportunity comes next. Promise you'll choose us. Don's expression softened, his hands releasing hers to frame her face. Charisse Smith, I will always choose us, always choose you. No project, no building, no career opportunity will ever matter more than what we're building together. He sealed the promise with a kiss that left her breathless, that convinced her more than words ever could, of his commitment to their shared future. In that moment, Charisse knew with absolute certainty that Don would return, that this separation, unlike the others, truly would be temporary. As she drove him to the airport an hour later, Charisse felt strangely calm. The passionate connection they had forged that morning had transformed something between them, deepening their bond in a way that transcended physical distance. 1 week, Don said as they stood at the security checkpoint, his forehead pressed against hers. 7 days, and then nothing will separate us again. Charisse believed him with her whole heart. Yet as she watched him disappear through security, she couldn't help wondering if fate had one final surprise in store, one last twist in their journey from silent devotion to spoken love. Chapter 10. Passionate Reunion. 5 days into Don's week in New York, a massive storm swept up the eastern seaboard, flooding coastal areas and causing widespread power outages. Charisse watched the news anxiously, text messages to Don going unanswered as cellular networks failed across affected regions. With the storm scheduled to reach their town by nightfall, Charisse hurried to secure the bakery. The expansion site was particularly vulnerable, the exposed foundation already filling with water despite the contractor's temporary covering. Thunder rumbled overhead as Charisse worked alone, moving equipment to higher ground, covering everything with tarps. Rain began to fall, first in scattered drops, then in sheets that reduced visibility to mere feet. She should leave, seek safety in her apartment, but the thought of Don's careful designs being ruined drove her to continue working as the storm intensified. Water rose quickly around the foundation, threatening to undermine the temporary supports. Charisse struggled to reinforce them, her clothes soaked through, her hands numbing in the cold rain. A sharp crack sounded overhead as a tree branch broke loose in the wind. "Charisse!" The voice cut through the storm's roar. Impossible. He was in New York, stranded by the same weather system. Yet when Charisse turned, there stood Don, rain streaming down his face, eyes wild with fear for her. "What are you doing here?" she shouted over the wind, disbelieving even as relief flooded through her. "Saving you," he answered, wading through, ankle-deep water to reach her. "Like you've always saved me." Don pulled her away from the unstable foundation, his arms strong around her waist. "The structure will hold, or it won't. Your safety matters more than any building." They made it to the bakery's back door just as the tree branch crashed down where Charisse had been working. Inside, dripping water onto the kitchen floor, they stared at each other in the dim emergency lighting, the reality of their narrow escape sinking in. "How did you get here?" Charisse asked, trembling with cold and leftover adrenaline. "All flights. Grounded. I drove," Don said simply. 20 hours straight. When I saw the storm's trajectory, when I couldn't reach you." His voice cracked. "I couldn't stay in New York knowing you were facing this alone. The Thompson project, I quit." 2 words, spoken without regret, that changed everything. Charisse stared at him, understanding dawning slowly. "You quit your job? For me?" Don stepped closer, his wet clothes brushing against hers. For us, I was in a meeting with the Thompson clients when the storm warnings began. All I could think about was you, here alone, our bakery threatened. And I realized something. His hands found hers, cold fingers intertwining. No building is worth missing the life we could build together. No project matters more than being where you are, especially when you might need me. But your career, my career will continue, Don interrupted gently. Already had 3 offers from local firms before I left New York. Turns out saving a historic French hotel makes you desirable, even in a small town. The power flickered and died completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by lightning. Flashes through the windows. In that primal illumination, Don's face showed raw emotion. Love, certainly, but also a fierce protectiveness that stole Charisse's breath. I'm done with separations, he said, his voice low and certain. Done with putting anything above us. When I saw the storm coming for you, I knew I'd drive through hell itself to reach you. Charisse had never felt more desired, more cherished than in that moment. With water pooling around their feet and wind howling outside, she reached for Don, her cold fingers tracing his rain-slicked face. You came back to me, she whispered, wonder in her voice. Always, he promised, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. Through any storm, any distance. Their lips met in a kiss that burned away the cold passion igniting between them with an intensity that rivaled the lightning outside. Don lifted Charisse onto the counter, stepping between her thighs, his mouth never leaving hers as his hands pushed her wet shirt up and over her head. I need you, he murmured against her neck, his teeth grazing her sensitive skin. Need to feel you alive in my arms. Charisse's head fell back, offering more access as she worked the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel his skin against hers. Then take me, she invited, her voice husky with desire. Right here. In the bakery kitchen, where they had first connected, surrounded by the evidence of their shared dreams, their bodies came together with urgent passion. Don's hands and mouth worshipped every inch of Charisse's rain-chilled skin, warming her with his touch, with the heat of his desire. Charisse matched his intensity, her baker's hands strong as they explored his body, claiming him as thoroughly as he claimed her. What followed was primal, driven by the storm's energy, by the relief of survival, by the certainty that they had finally overcome the last obstacle fate had placed between them. The counter that had witnessed countless moments of their evolving relationship now bore witness to its ultimate consummation, their bodies moving together in perfect rhythm, creating a different kind of magic than either had created alone. Afterward, they made their way upstairs to Charisse's apartment by flashlight, pausing on the stairs to kiss, to touch, unable to maintain even minimal separation now that they had rediscovered each other's bodies. They fell onto her bed, still half-clothed, laughing as they helped each other undress fully, the urgency of their first encounter giving way to playful exploration. 6 years, Don said, as he hovered above Charisse, his eyes drinking in the sight of her bare skin against the sheets. 6 years I've dreamed of seeing you like this. 6 years you've drawn me with clothes, Charisse teased, her hands tracing the muscles of his shoulders. Does the reality match your imagination? Don's smile was reverent as he lowered his head to press a kiss between her breasts, where her heart beat strong beneath his lips. Reality surpasses any dream, he murmured against her skin. You're more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. Their second lovemaking was slower, more deliberate, each taking time to discover what pleased the other, to memorize the contours of the other's body. Don's artist's eye missed nothing, his hands and mouth following paths his gaze traced first, learning Charisse through touch as thoroughly as he had once learned her through observation. Charisse reveled in Don's responsiveness, in the way his breath caught when she explored a sensitive spot in the sounds he made when pleasure overwhelmed his usual reserve. This was a different kind of intimacy than their passionate kitchen encounter, deeper, more vulnerable, a true sharing of themselves beyond physical need. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within Charis's bedroom, they created their own sanctuary. Wind and rain faded to background noise, unimportant compared to whispered endearments, gasps of pleasure, the rustle of sheets as they moved together. "I love you," Charis breathed, a sensation built within her, her body arching against Don's. "I've always loved you." "And I've loved you," Don replied, his voice strained with the effort of control. "From the moment you offered shelter from the rain." Their release came together, a perfect synchronicity that left them breathless, clinging to each other as if afraid the storm might somehow tear them apart again. Afterward, they lay tangled in each other's arms, Don's fingers tracing lazy patterns on Charis's back as she rested her head on his chest. "When the storm passes," he murmured, his voice a gentle rumble beneath her ear. "When we see what damage it's done to the expansion site, we'll rebuild. Together." Charis lifted her head to look at him, touched by his certainty. It might be extensive. The foundation was already compromised. "Then we'll design something new," Don said simply. "Something stronger for having weathered this storm, just like us." Morning brought weak sunlight and surveying the damage. The expansion site had indeed suffered. The temporary supports collapsed, mud filling the foundation, but the original bakery stood firm, and most importantly, they faced the destruction together. "It's not as bad as it looks," Don assured her, his arm around her waist as they stood amid the mud. "We can revise the plans, adapt to the new conditions. It might actually be better than the original design." Charis leaned into his strength, drawing comfort from his optimism. "As long as we're doing it together, I know it will be perfect." Over the next few months, they rebuilt both the bakery expansion and their life together. Don accepted a position with a local architectural firm that allowed him to be home every night. Charis expanded her business according to their revised plans, creating a space that honored her grandmother's legacy while embracing their shared future. Eliza stayed on as a mentor and occasional consultant, her expertise proving valuable as the bakery grew into its new identity. 6 months to the day after the storm, Don brought Charis to the completed expansion for a private tour before the grand opening. Each room reflected their collaborative vision. Don's architectural expertise merged seamlessly with Charis's practical knowledge of what a working bakery required. In the small office overlooking the garden, Don had created a surprise. One wall displayed his sketches of Charis from the very beginning, her at the counter on that first rainy day, laughing with customers, concentrating on a delicate pastry decoration. 6 years of silent devotion preserved and celebrated. "My journey of loving you," Don explained as Charis moved along the wall, tears filling her eyes at this visual history of their relationship. "From watching from afar to creating beside you." At the end of the display was an empty space, just large enough for one more sketch. There, Don dropped to one knee, producing not a drawing, but a small velvet box. "Charis Smith," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "You've been the subject of my art, the inspiration for my best work, and the love of my life. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, my partner in everything we create from this day forward?" The ring inside the box was perfect, a simple diamond set in a band, engraved with tiny rolling pins and architect's pencils, symbols of their intertwined professions and passions. "Yes," Charis answered without hesitation, joy radiating from her like sunlight. "1,000 times yes." As Don slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to seal their engagement with a kiss that promised passion for a lifetime, Charis knew they had created something far more beautiful than either could have designed alone. A love that had survived distance, doubt, storms, both literal and figurative. A love that had begun in silence but would continue in joyful, passionate expression for all the years to come. In the final space on the wall, they would eventually hang a wedding portrait, Charisse radiant in ivory lace, Don gazing at her with the same adoration that had filled his first sketch of her. But more precious than any image were the memories they created each day, waking in each other's arms, working side by side, building a life enriched by both her nurturing warmth and his thoughtful creativity. Their journey from silent devotion to spoken love had completed its circle, returning them to the bakery where it all began. But now there was no rain to seek shelter from, no walls between their hearts, no words left unspoken, only love, expressed in every touch, every kiss, every shared creation, a passionate devotion that would sustain them through all the seasons of their life together.